the hills, Sabbatarian Unitarians of the hills. My grandmother and father told me about William Mullins' children. He was married to a Baptist lady who gave her children Sundays off, and they had a lot of corn to hoe. But William Mullins never let his children do any work on the Sabbath. So that meant they got 2 days off from hoeing corn. They were very much the envy of the people, the other children living around them, because they got 2 days off in the week instead of only one. Well, the Mullins family was certainly a very colorful Sabbatarian Unitarian family. My grandmother told me about how they used to have a stick, and they'd make a notch in the stick every day, and then when Friday evening came, they made a bigger notch, and they knew when the Sabbath was coming, because they didn't even have calendars. And otherwise, they followed the moon, and they counted the moons very carefully and watched the sky in order to establish the times of the annual feasts, and also when to plant. Well, William Mullins lived at a time when he could buy an almanac, and he planted his corn and beans by the moon, and he worshipped by the moon as well, following, counting out the spring feasts and the autumn feasts from the Bible. He would go down to Sutton and go to the Seventh-day Baptist Church. There was Roanoke Seventh-day Baptist Church down there. It's I think they built a dam and covered it with water, actually, and the freeway goes down through there. The place is no longer existent, but he never actually joined the church. And then when the Adventists came in, he would go down to that one once in a while on a Sabbath, too. People would ask him what church he belonged to. Well, I go to both the Seventh-day Baptists and the Adventists once in a while, but I don't trust either one of them. Independent mountain people, keeping the Sabbath and keeping the faith all the way down the years. Now, I used to listen to those stories of how they used to do things. Now, William Mullins' father was John Mullins, and they had to come up into West Virginia, further away from the trouble area, because John Mullins' niece married a Hatfield. And there was a lot of feuding going on. They had to come up to Browns Mountain in Webster County in West Virginia to get away from the fighting, and that's where the McElwains were living. But and Sabbatarians, McElwains were Sabbatarians from the Celtic side. So there they met. And while they were living on Browns Mountain, my grandmother would tell me about how her father lived. I was sitting there in West Virginia one day, and I'd seen so many people chewing tobacco. I blurted out, I said, "A decent person does not chew tobacco." And my grandmother reared up and she said, "Well, my father, Bill Mullins, every morning of his life put a chaw of tobacco in his mouth, and every evening he sat out on the porch with a jug of moonshine beside him and polished his teeth with a matchstick." So they were colorful people. And I learned not to say too strong of condemnations of things before finding out first. But John Mullins was living there too. My grandmother remembers him. He came in one day and he said somebody's stealing corn, and they had a corn crib with was made out of logs, and you could put your hand through the logs and get corn out of it. They did that so the air would go through it and dry the corn. And he noticed that the corn was sinking down. Somebody was taking corn in the night. And so he took a trap, put a trap in that corn, and anyone that'd stick their hand in there in the dark wouldn't see that trap and get caught in it. Well, it wasn't, but the very next morning, I guess, just before milking time, they heard yelling and shouting. Somebody was out there screaming, "Oh, Mr. Mullins, let me go." woke everybody up, and my grandmother was a little girl. And she went out there, and her sisters and her mother and grandmother and everybody, they went out, and they were just crying and wringing their hands and saying, "Grandpa, let him go. Grandpa, let him go." And he just screaming. Grandpa Mullins just walked to the barn with his pail, said, I got to milk the cows." Went in there and milked the cows and came out. The man screaming all along, "Oh, Mr. Mullins, let me go." And so he came out there to take care of him. And he reached his hand into the corn crib and pulled out an ear of corn and looked at it. It wasn't quite good enough, so he chose another one. He chose all the best corn he could find. Took him a long time. Filled a sack with it and put it on the man's horse. And then finally he let him out of the trap and said, "Now you get on that horse and don't you ever come back here." So that was how our old Sabbatarian Unitarian in the hills got along with his neighbors. But down in Pikes County, in Pikeville, they had John Mullins was he was known to get drunk twice a year, and I think it was putting on, because he'd ride through Pikes County, Pikeville, shooting, and people would scatter twice a year. I guess he was trying to keep up his reputation for a hard man, because people would come to him. They had a neighbor down there, a couple. They had a son that drank all the time. He was a real drinker. And the old couple came up to the farm one day with their ears on a white napkin. Their son had cut off their ears because they refused to give him any money for drink. And Grandma Mullins rang the dinner bell, and people came from all directions. They knew something was wrong, and they found this couple with their ears there. Meanwhile, the son had taken a chest and been dragging it through the woods to get away. And they went after him, and they found him. They stood him up on that chest, and they put a rope around his neck, and his parents came up and cried and begged, "Don't hang him, don't hang him." They kicked the chest out, and there he hung. But there was a woman of ill repute living on the other side of the farm, and all the children that weren't wanted in the neighborhood were left on her doorstep. And if she didn't have money to feed those kids, I guess she had to do something to feed them. And some of the church people got together, and they were going to give her a bath and kerosene. She sent one of the little boys over to John Mullins, and here came John Mullins, and there were all the church people there ready to give her a bath and kerosene. And they'd had her already stripped down and ready to go. And he came up riding on a mule and carrying a rifle. And he said, "Now, you give her clothes, and you get out of here. And I want her smokehouse to be filled from now on. Every single one of you has slept with her. You don't have any business condemning her. And you keep her smokehouse filled from now on, and leave her alone." Well, from then on, the smokehouse was filled, and that's how our Sabbatarian Unitarian took care of his neighbors and brought morality into the neighborhood. So there we find him, descended from the Paulicians, the Moorish Sabbatarians taking refuge in the hills, people descended from the Celts, the Seventh-day Baptists, and people descended from the Pilgrim Fathers. All these groups of Sabbatarian Unitarians coming together, hiding in the hills and keeping the faith. How did Trinitarianism come into Adventism? Well, Grandpa Mullins would go to the Adventist church sometimes, and he never joined it.